Hello, and welcome to SustainaPod, the podcast produced by young people for young people about the world of sustainability. We talk with leading professionals and change makers about building a more sustainable present and future, sharing stories, tips, and insights for you to take action.
This is a special episode brought to you by the SustainaPod Imperial Team. I'm Kai.
And I'm Selina.
And we are both freshers here at Imperial and will be your hosts for today. Backstage, we have Parko producing this episode. If you're from Imperial and are also interested in sustainability, consider joining us.
Today, we'll discuss the MIT Energy and Climate Hack. In 2022, 4 students at Imperial got first in their category in the competition and top 10 in the overall competition.
Online with us today, we have Zanna Buckland, George Su, Xavier Keogh, and Tanish Goel. So guys, how are you today?
Good, thank you.
Doing well, thank you.
Yeah, I'm good. Thank you for asking.
Doing good.
For all the listeners out there, could you guys introduce yourselves?
My name's Xavier Keogh. I am a final year theoretical physics student at Imperial. I'm originally from Australia, but I spent a lot of time growing up overseas. I've lived in Hong Kong, Singapore, South Korea. So I was kind of brought into that international, landscape earlier on. Hence, I came over to London for uni.
I'm Zanna. I grew up in Hong Kong. My dad is from the UK, my mom's from Hong Kong. I went to Shattuck College International School, and then moved here for university, where I studied material science and engineering for my undergrad, and I'm now studying environmental technology masters.
I'm Tanish. I'm a fourth year computing student at Imperial. Originally, I'm from New Delhi, India. Even though I'm from India, I enjoy skiing, which a lot of people are surprised about. That's
really interesting.
And my name is George Su. I'm currently a master's student at Cambridge doing scientific computing, which is like computer science and physics, kind of. And I did my undergrad at Imperial doing theoretical physics. I've lived all around the world, but in Hong Kong for the longest. And I also went to the same high school as Zanna.
So, could you guys give us an overview of the aims of the hackathon that you guys did and what participants were tasked with?
Yeah, well, George is probably the right person to take us through that. He was the one that recruited Zanna, Tanish, and I, so I think he'd be the best person to introduce what it was about and what we did.
So I sort of came across the hackathon on this newsletter from, I think, the Imperial Energy Society or something along those lines. But basically, it's a competition where the top universities from across the world, mostly across the US, but also, in the UK too, and basically all parts of the world come together. You form a team of 4 and you compete in this competition that is focused around sustainability and climate and trying to create sustainable solutions for our climate challenges. There's a particular theme, and for our year, it was called Decarbonizing the Built Environment, and we can talk more about that later. And the way the competition works is that there's usually a bunch of industry sponsors for the particular event, and the industry sponsors will have problems or projects in mind that you can choose to work for. And often these are like real world problems that they need solutions for. And a lot of times they like directly and genuinely need someone to provide a solution for them. And then you can bid for the projects. And if you get it, you try and come up over the course of 2-3 days, basically nonstop. You can come up with this final product and solution you pitch to them, which then the industry partner themselves will choose which one is the best. And then in the end, that group will go towards a final like top 10, which will be judged by other people. The first round is sort of more like how good your solution is for the particular problem, because that's where the particular industry partner, say that, McKinsey has this particular problem and how well it suits them. And the second round is judged more overall. And at that, I think that's more how good your presentation is and how, your scope, your creativity and things like that. But the emphasis is definitely on environment rather than, it is called a hackathon. So there is a lot of technology employed. but fundamentally it's about, creating a sustainable solution for the world.
That sounds really interesting.
I was just curious, like, so you mentioned these are like actual problems that people in industry have. Do you know if any of your solutions or like solutions from other teams actually end up getting employed for that specific solution that that company has? And like, do they like collaborate with the students that like proposed it? Or
Yeah, for particular problems, definitely. I think anyone on the team can talk more about this later. I think Zanna, you were more in contact with Nicole afterwards. So do you want to talk about this?
I was a little bit in contact. I think Xavier and I both reached out to Nicole, who's the CFO for the company that we worked with. They are a startup and they were founded by two women. I believe two women, and their whole team at the time was all female, which was really cool for me in particular. And they have built basically a database for construction materials where you can kind of look um, at different sustainable options so that you can choose like materials that will be better for your projects. We gave them some kind of advice on like how we think they could have improved their interface a little bit based on like what we think consumers want to see and like what they might want to look for. And we also tried to help them develop like a kind of comparative um, framework for their database so that you could maybe see how many carbon emissions something will produce compared to another material. Say you've got two types of steel that are produced by different companies. Maybe one of them is more sustainable in a certain category, but maybe the other one is how cost effective it will be and things like that. So the trade offs. And yeah, so we spoke to Nicole. She was like the our guidance for the time we were there. And she kind of talked us through like the problems they were having and um, what their company was doing. She was really lovely, very, very smart. She went to Harvard and she um, also worked in China for a little bit and studied like Mandarin. Um, so yeah, we were really lucky to work with like such an incredible founder. Um, and yeah, that's kind of basically what they do. Um, and another thing that we helped them out with was their web scraping, which I have no experience with whatsoever. Tanish um, did most of that side of things, so maybe I'll let him talk a little bit about that.
So I guess it was so to give you a bit of context, uh, the problem was that more and more new regulations are being imposed on developers to source materials which are sustainable, have a certain sustainability rating, and this imposes a lot of overhead, a lot of manual labor on the part of the developers to source these materials from manufacturers. So the idea behind this was that if we can provide them with a central gateway where they can access these materials, I mean, that's what Tangible is doing, where they can access these materials and information about them and reach out to develop manufacturers eventually, then it would be a really good product and would severely reduce the overhead and manual labor involved in sourcing these materials. So the best way we thought about doing this was if we had a list of developers, then we could just simply web scrape their website and get PDFs relating to these materials, which then we can feed through to like optical character recognition models, to question answer models. And yeah, that was basically the state of art then. And they have recently been started, like they have like started gaining a lot of prominence in the form of LLMs, but these models work on a similar architecture. And the idea was that a developer can just ask questions based on these PDFs to the model, and we would give them the required answers about these materials. So yeah, that's how the main idea behind the web scraping came about.
Yeah, and to go back to like the point of what you actually asked, which was whether companies like actually hire people and like take these ideas on board. I think um, we haven't actually seen the result of what they've done yet because they're still in like pilot phases, so they're um, still trying to build up investment and things like that. Xavier and I did speak to Nicole afterwards just to kind of keep in contact a little bit. And I recently like reached out to her on LinkedIn. So we've kind of still got a little bit of that connection. Because they're a startup, they didn't really have job openings. They had like maybe one, I think it might be software engineering. And so there wasn't so much opportunity in that sense, but we still have, we gained the connection, we gained like the experience of working with them. So that was really useful for all of us. And I think potentially with some of the bigger clients, there's obviously room to like gain network, people in the network who can maybe boost your application later on. Obviously for big clients like McKinsey, and I think this year they have Google as one of them. So yeah, it's a really good opportunity. And yeah, they recently have released a demo version of their database that people can, developers can like have a go at looking at, and they can request to kind of see how it works, which is very cool. So we're kind of seeing them like progress and actually make it a reality, which is very cool.
I think like the best thing about those sorts of events are just it's a really like intense weekend where you get huge exposure to the cutting edge issues that the sustainability industry are facing. And you're hearing it directly from the horse's mouth, per se, where these are founders, they're large firms, they are change makers in the industry, and they're coming to you as young adults with the problems that they're facing and how they want them to be solved, and coming up with ideas about, where is the latest technology? How can we embed that into our system? Where is the latest research? What are some fresh ideas? And that's ultimately what they want. And so that was, for me at least, the most exciting part of the weekend, particularly working with Tangible Materials, who were only a few years old at that point. We felt like we could really add value to their business process and their development process. And I think we brought in total like quite a fresh perspective on how we can connect, the real estate developers to the manufacturers through using some modern techniques like Tanish went into about web scraping, and how we can make that more seamless with current technology.
Okay, so would you say, so you mentioned like working with a startup and you felt like you could make an actual impact in what they were doing past that point. Would you say that you felt more comfortable working with a startup in that sense then? Because as much as there's the benefit of with bigger clients, you could probably get more of a network. Do you feel it's like more approachable to like work with a startup in that way?
Yeah, I think, well, first I'll start with why I think I can answer this question is that I've had some experience working with smaller companies and larger companies through internships and things like that. And I think the benefit you get from small companies is that you don't have as much of a training wheel effect. So you are really embedded in the actual work that they're doing. And so what that means is that people more senior than you are genuinely relying on the output that you produce. And so that's both beneficial in that, the work you're doing is valuable and it's relevant. The drawback being that it can be quite intense and quite a steep learning curve, and that's not for everyone. On the flip side, working with a larger firm, you have a little bit more infrastructure around you, and there is a little bit more of a system in place. And so that can be nice for clarity, and for in those early stages of your development, you can see how it's been done before and you can replicate that process. And so it can be quite a streamlined way of getting a lot of experience quite quickly. And so I think there's pros and cons to both. Ideally, get experience in both so that you can reap the rewards of both perspectives. But I mean, for us, I think we got nothing but positives from working with Tangible, and I think that's sort of where the benefit for us really lied.
I think Zave summed it up pretty perfectly. The only thing to add is just setting the scene for the energy hack specifically, because I don't think we talked enough about the background of the event. We kind of jumped straight into it, and I know you have some questions on this, so we can come back to it later. But also, just in general, the event, the industry sponsors range very wildly in size. I think Tangible was the most smallest company there, and most of the companies there were actually humongous companies. So the industry sponsors, along with McKinsey, which everyone knows is consulting giant, there were also, I think, Skanska, which is this huge truck company, I believe.
Steel,
There was
I think.
there was a massive steel company, which is, I think, their product was called Nucor, or was the company called Nucor?
Nucor was
Which is
the
like I think
company.
one of the biggest. Yeah, Nucor was the biggest steel producer in the U.S. and there were a couple other just very very big companies, and you could definitely see the difference in scale between the companies. With something like Tangible, you work closer on, genuine problems. With a bigger company, they'll give you questions that are more like hypotheticals, right? Because they have people that can do these day-to-day things, or they've already done the very fundamental things. But it was like, hypothetically, how can we get this, tank of brains here to come up with something more revolutionary? And those were like the McKinsey questions, which was something like, we have to power, I think, a data center of the future. Oh no, that was someone else, but something along like, okay, maybe someone will say, okay, there's these server rooms that will take up so much energy. How do we make it efficient? You can have any resources, any technique that you can think of, granted that it's realistic. Just go wild. So these kind of questions really ranged. And you could get involved on both ends of the spectrum in that competition.
So it sounds like you guys had like a really diverse range of experiences in the hackathon, like working with a lot of different clients of different sizes and also dealing with different topics. What would you say was the most challenging moment in the hackathon? And like, for example, would you say there was a time where there were too many good ideas and you had to narrow it down? Or were there like very standout, memorable moments of your experience?
Before we jump in, I think we should just set the scene, okay? Um, because I don't think we've really explained. The hackathon was like a 3-day thing, right? Which already in hackathon language means you don't sleep, basically. You just work on this. Now, originally when I started this, I pitched it as an online thing, but in the back of my mind, I was always like, it would be dope to go to Boston. So yeah, just to add context before Zanna goes on, we basically flew there with very short notice, or we got funding. We flew there, spent like a weekend there, and flew back for lectures. So it was a very crazy event in itself and very sleep deprived event.
Yeah. So probably the first challenge we encountered was we arrived. This is gonna go on a tangent. It's not actually about the work. We arrived on, I think it was a Thursday afternoon, and we got to the airport and we like got through, did all of our stuff, um, and we get to like basically the Airbnb that Xavier's booked for us kindly, um, and uh, we looked through like the details of like how we're supposed to get in, and we're like, oh yeah, this is the right place. So we go down to like their lockbox and we check the lockbox with the code. The code is correct. And then inside the lockbox there isn't a key. So at first we're like, wait, what are they doing? Like, did they just like not give us the key? Was there like something that we missed? And so like we're standing outside just kind of trying to figure out with our like what to do with our luggage. And we try and contact like the agent, I think. And so while we're standing out there, out in front of this house, these like two American students, um, kind of come along and like they obviously see these people standing outside the Airbnb that they've booked, and they're like, "What's happening? Like, why are these people just standing here?" And so they ask us like what we're doing there, and we're like, "Oh, we're supposed to be staying in this Airbnb." And they're like, "Oh no, well we've got it for like the night." Um, and then we realized that Xavier's booked for the night after we arrive instead of the night that we arrive. Um, so bearing in mind, we're obviously quite tired and like don't really know what to do. Um, we these like lovely American people asked us to come and just like chill out with them for a little bit, um, while we figured out basically where we're gonna stay for the night. But it was a real bonding moment for all four of us because like we hadn't done anything together before and um, just kind of got thrown into it. Luckily, we managed to book. I think it was something like Holiday Inn. I don't remember exactly. So we all kind of like crowded into one room. But it's a steep bonding experience, which was actually really lovely.
Yeah, I was gonna say I don't recall. I don't recall at the time Tanner, Zanna, Tanish, or George saying it was a bonding moment. I felt like a bit of an idiot. I can't lie, but it is the way it is.
But yeah, anyway, I'll get back to the point of the question, which was, were there any big challenges? As George said, it was a lot of work and new experiences and like learning in like 36 hours, I think the hackathon was. Plus like the extra bits of time like either end of the actual hackathon work, where we took a little trip to Harvard to kind of have a look around, because most of us hadn't been there. And then we had like other talks from sponsors, and then like the actual closing ceremony and stuff, or opening and closing ceremony. Um, so that was probably like the biggest thing where we were running on like quite little sleep over the weekend, and like trying to produce like a decent product for the company still. Um, I don't know if anyone else has anything in particular to add.
I mean, you guys know this. So I towards like the middle of end, I had a moment where I like had a breakdown. And it's not really a breakdown, but it was just me getting so sucked into the work that I was just like that's all I could think about. And I started just like basically not talking to the group, just thinking about this like problem I'm trying to solve in terms of like code or whatever. And it was hilarious because when I when I when I have a problem in mind, I just can't really, function normally. I want to get it done. So, but then at the same time, you got to do the annoying things of eating and sustaining yourself and sleeping. So there was a point where,
Yeah,
well, no,
yeah.
like the whole weekend, I basically ate Takis. Like, do you guys know what Takis are? They're like hot Cheetos. And I function off of Takis for like a good portion of the time, which is crazy. But like now I have this incredible bond with Takis, and now I think Tanish is like traumatized by Takis after that.
Yeah, there was a lot of junk food on that trip.
There's also like intermittent sleeping where we would like take turns sleeping. It was very interesting.
Yeah, I think like again with like the bonding and like the like learning curve, um, because we hadn't worked together before, um, is this very condensed, like getting to know each other, getting to like figure out where everyone's strengths were, um, and like being able to delegate and like not make people mad and stuff like that. And I think luckily for us, like we gelled very well, um, and like got along very well over the weekend. But it can be difficult in general. I imagine most hackathons are pretty similar, where like you get thrown into a group, um, and same for like even regular university group projects. Um, the biggest thing is like just being able to um, kind of understand where everyone is and like what they're aiming to do and everything. And um, yeah, I think like that's probably the biggest challenge, not just in these projects, but also like just in work in general. Being able to talk to lots of different people and like understand where they're coming from.
That sounds like a roller coaster of an event. I think going back to the Airbnb, I think our listeners would be interested to know, Tanish, what was going through your head when you had nowhere to stay on the first night?
I mean, if I'm being honest, uh, I w- like I had a lot of emotions. It ranged from how can someone make a stupid mistake like this to please give me some sleep. But then eventually we had like a really good dinner. We found a place to sleep and it was all good. And, like I would say like experiences like these kind of build a trip and like get a team together, if you know what I mean. Like I don't know, shared trauma has something which brings people together. I swear Xavier did it as a team building exercise.
It was only up from there.
I really would have thought that the actual intense pressure of the hackathon would have brought you guys together, but it's very interesting to find out that actually most of it happened beforehand. But speaking of, I'm not sure if you're really selling the idea of a hackathon, although it is very well known to be quite intense. So, would you recommend this sort of experience to other people?
Absolutely. Like, we spent 3 days funded by Imperial to go and visit
And
MIT.
MIT.
Yeah, funded.
Like like I have a check from MIT
Yeah,
from this, which is also pretty cool.
exactly. So between MIT, Harvard then is like, I don't know, half an hour walk away. I personally had never been to the US before, so that was a pretty awesome experience. The topic of conversation, the hackathon itself, was right up my alley and our alley of what we wanted to do after university. So if you can find something that kind of ticks those boxes, then really there's no reason why you shouldn't put your hat in the ring and give that a go. And like all the bumps and things that come along the way, I mean, in hindsight, like, we haven't, this hackathon was almost this time last year. I mean, they're not the things that we remember are just how wonderful and fun that weekend was, and how unique of an experience that is for university students. And so I'm just so grateful that we had that opportunity. And I would absolutely encourage everyone to get involved with as much as they can while they're at uni, particularly if it gets you overseas and lets you have a bit of fun.
It is honestly probably the most memorable thing I did in last school year, because just if you get to go overseas anywhere for anything, you have to go. Like, you have to go in person. It's a completely different experience when you get to go in person. But on top of that, having all these things with the setting of going to MIT was incredible. Like, whatever image you have of MIT, it is basically that. Like, it's a university that looks like a high-tech city, and everyone there is very, very sharp. Everyone we got to talk to and work with, you know how sometimes there's people in industry that sounds like they're just speaking a lot of words without making much sense. This is the opposite. Like, people could pinpoint exactly, what crap someone was saying, and can ask like the perfect question. And you got to meet like people with very different background. Like, US education is very different. And you got to, meet people from Harvard, MIT, Yale, like all sorts of people from everywhere. But just also the spontaneity, like, uni is about taking opportunities to do these kind of things. And I think it's very easy at Imperial to sort of forget that because you get very buried in the work. But if you ever get a chance to do something like this, you must, you know.
And like, just on the note of like hackathons in general, I feel like, at least personally, I'm a little put off by the name, because like it's assumed that it's going to be something like very technical, likely in like programming, computing, which is true of like Imperial's like main hackathon, but actually it's just kind of a general term for problem solving in like a short span of time. Um, Ours was less. I mean, there was the tech element still, but um, as long as you have like a varied group, you might not necessarily have to do any of that. Um, and yeah, it's like just kind of, I like it. You have to kind of just go for it and try it out. Even if you aren't like necessarily good at computing and you wanted to try like a proper hackathon, it's always a good experience. And the fact that like so many groups are involved means that, I mean, you even kind of get some groups that just drop out. Like, they might not necessarily finish it, but they've at least like come for the experience and like had a go. Um, and like, again, similar to what George said, that's what uni's about. Doing these things like while it doesn't matter quite as much as when you're doing it in like your job, and just like trying out new things. Um, and like, on the note of taking opportunities at university, I also did a competition called C40, Students Reinventing Cities, at the end of my last year. And that wasn't like an in-person event, it was like a longer project. But it's something that like I probably wouldn't have done if I hadn't like done the MIT hack, because I'd had that one experience of like, oh, have a go, and it worked out really well. And yeah, and then like when this other project came along, I was like, oh, like it's probably going to be at least similar, if not like even better than the first one. So you kind of just need that moment of like get going and like get out there and put yourself in these like positions to take these opportunities. So yeah.
And I think it also like propelled, for me personally, it propelled my passion for sustainability and my and providing an avenue to get into that professionally. And it can also be do the opposite, and it can really show you, okay, this is what sustainability looks like in industry. I don't really think this is for me, and so it can be a really great opportunity over like a short space of time to get a gauge on how you might fit into an industry, how your skill set aligns with what's required by different industries. I know Tanish has done like a lot of other hackathons, and so he can maybe speak to what was different about this hackathon to other ones and some common themes he's felt between them. And yeah, I think I'd actually really like to hear from Tanish actually about how he compared the two hackathons, or a series of hackathons.
Okay, so I've done a lot of hackathons over my time. Have generally been interested in coding, programming, building things. So that was the right avenue from high school to college to like do something with a very short time frame which has adequate results. So like I did IC hack the year before or the same year I think, and following that I did the MIT energy hack. I wouldn't say the core premise was that different. The core premise of a hackathon is to build something which can be utilized almost immediately or provides a promising avenue which can be explored further to develop into a viable product. So the core tenant remains the same, and college hackathons specifically focus a lot more on different sponsored categories. So that was very similar as well. So you would have different sponsors who want different things to be done based on what they do in general in their corporate life, and you basically try to implement those things. So I would say the core premise and the structure remains the same, but the way that we approach the problems, the way that we solve the problems was very different between the two hackathons. So while Imperial's IC hack was a lot more tech focused, a lot of tech solutions, and the core idea was to program something which will be viable and which will be a good product for someone to use or has a particular use case. MIT's energy hack was a lot more, I would say, creative. Like you come up with creative solutions to solve problems based on sustainability. And it didn't involve coding in the traditional sense. Like the first approach was always how would you solve a particular problem? And that allowed us to, first of all, get exposure to what sustainability is, how companies who are basically at the forefront here taking taking sustainability to the next level and basically making it viable for the whole population in general to basically start caring about. And it also gave us an avenue to basically flex our minds, think creatively about problems. So I feel, yeah, even though the core tenant remains the same, the way you approach the problems differs a lot between different hackathons. That was quite interesting to experience as well.
Your hackathon experience. It sounds really, really packed and full of interesting events.